my direct witch ancestors, and the infamous Salem witch trials of 1692. My late mother was by any and all definition a truly incredible and unique witch who was the direct descendant of some of history's most notorious, in some cases even infamous witches and practitioners of the craft of sortilege or witchcraft. The first of many such direct ancestors and the most recent in history was my 10th great-grandmother via my mother's paternal side. This was the renowned and famous witch of Northampton, the witch Mary Bliss Parsons. It was during the Salem witch trials that took place in Massachusetts between February 1692 and May 1693 that she had been accused and tried for being a witch. Now, what is interesting about my great-grandmother Mary Bliss Parsons' case is that, according to historical accounts, this wasn't the first time my great-grandmother had been brought before the courts and accused of being a witch. This happened twice, and on both occasions she was acquitted and her case thrown out. Now, I have done a lot of research and digging around, and I have discovered that, based on credible accounts and sources, the reason for her acquittal on both occasions was mainly down to her husband, my 10th great-grandfather, Joseph Parsons, who apparently was a very wealthy and influential member of the community, so it seems that my great-grandfather was able to pull a few behind-the-scenes strings and even perhaps grease the palms of some of the judges presiding over my great-grandmother's case, which resulted in her acquittal. There was one other direct ancestor of my mother's who had also been accused, tried, and on this occasion found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging during the infamous Salem witch trials. This was my 11th great-grandmother, Mary Bradbury Perkins, only this time via my mother's maternal side. In the notorious witch trials of 1692, according to the testimony of many witnesses, my great-grandmother Mary Perkins had assumed animal forms. Her most unusual metamorphosis was said to have been that of a blue boar. Another allegation against her was that she cast spells upon ships. Over 100 of her neighbors and townspeople testified on her behalf, alas to no avail, and so she was found guilty of being a witch and for the practicing of witchcraft, and so consequently sentenced to be executed on September 9th, 1692. Through the ongoing efforts of her friends, her execution was delayed. After the witch debacle had passed, she was released. By some accounts, she was allowed to escape. It has been said, according to some historical accounts, that she bribed her jailer. Another account claims that her husband bribed the jailer and so took her away to Maine, hidden in a cart. My great-grandparents, 11 times removed, returned to Massachusetts after the witch trials had ended, and the witch hysteria had died down. My great-grandmother eventually died of natural causes in her own bed in the year 1700, at the ripe old age of 85. All rights reserved by the author Darius Radmanish. Factual tale told and written by the author Darius Radmanish. Narrated by the author Darius Radmanish. Audiobook produced by the author Darius Radmanish. Preface. All information, facts, and details as outlined and depicted in this here audiobook have been alluded to in the works that comprise my duology, Linda McKim, The Witch from Adair County, and The Blue Moon Cafe First Date, published in print, April 24th, 2023. Also Linda McKim, A Witch's Curse First Date, published in print, April 19th, 2024. In addition, also the Gypsy Witch, Linda McKim, and The Two Crows First in print, published date 5th of November, 2023, which is itself the addendum to Linda McKim, A Witch's Curse. 1113 West Paterson and the Spectral Well. There are some facts and details surrounding my late dear mother's childhood home, which was also the home of my great-grandmother Carie, maiden name Mabis, married name McKim, located on 1113 West Paterson Street in my hometown of Kirksville, Missouri, Adair County, USA, that I would like to bring to light that is, to say the least, eerie and spectral. A home also where my mother had grown up since she was just 2 days old. This was due to my mother's mother, my grandmother, whilst my grandmother handed my mother over, "Here, take it." And so how my late dear mother's first days in this world began, unwanted and shunned and discarded by her own parents as if nothing more than some old ragged cloths. A tragic, sad, and painful knowledge that she, my dear mother, never overcame and so never came to terms with. It had left an everlasting scar and sadness that weighed heavily on her mind and heart, a heaviness, a sadness that she had been cursed to endure and so be burdened with and carry it with her wherever she went for the rest of her life until her passing on June 11th, 2013. My mother had once shared with me a strange and chilling story about the property on which the house was built on. It was built by my great-grandfather, Charles Henry McKim, with his own bare hands sometime in the early 1900s. My mother once said that the house was built right smack on top of a dried out what was once a very old and mysterious water well or pond. She wasn't certain as to which. She said that no one ever knew if it was a natural creation or if it had been built by man. She said that apparently it was wide in diameter and somewhat deep. When my great-grandfather first purchased the property in them days, in the early 20th century, there were no other homes anywhere near the vicinity of the property as they are today. The property was, for the most part, considered outside of city limits back then. Well, my mother told me that my great-grandfather was faced with a dilemma. Because of the well pond being located right in the center of the property, this presented a problem, and so made it near to almost impossible to build his house. And so my great-grandfather, in order to solve the problem and be able to build on the property, he was forced to fill in the well and then build the house on top of it. And so that's what he did. Mom told me that he filled it in with everything he could get his hands on, mainly old wagon carts, rock boulders, lumber, and whatever else he could find until finally the well was filled up. He then laid the foundation to the house, and voila, there stood the house we see standing to this very day. The house, as I have pointed out, is still standing, and from what I have heard, it has been pretty much abandoned. It is empty, and no one has lived there since my great aunt, Lillian Evie Evelyn Nichols McKim, lived there and passed away in 2002. My mother said that my great-grandfather had built the restroom of the house exactly right over the center of what would have been the large hole, and he had run the toilet sewer line straight down into it. My mother said that during the years she was living there when she was a little girl, whenever she would go into the restroom at night, she could hear strange and mysterious sounds of what sounded like low and muffled wailing, moaning, and also at times what seemed like gentle scratching sounds against the bathroom's floorboards coming up from where the well was. Of course, my dear mother had raised this matter on several occasions with her grandmother. However, her concerns were always dismissed, and she was told that she had an overactive imagination and that there was nothing down in that hole but old wagon carts, lumber rocks, and sewage. Mom said that she was the only one who ever complained about hearing strange sounds from that well. Now, this is the honest to goodness truth, people, and isn't it strange that it was in this very house that my dear mother had, during her childhood, on several occasions also witnessed and experienced paranormal encounters. And so a truly eerie and uncanny building is that house, that's for sure, and it most certainly does make one wonder. The following is the photo that I have provided of my late dear mother's childhood home where she lived and grew up in, and had experienced over the course of her childhood years on a number of occasions encounters with the paranormal and spectral, located on 1113 West Paterson Street, Adair County, Missouri, USA. It's also important to note that it was in the backyard of this same house where in the spring of 1959 that my mother, whilst playing, was approached and spoken to by the apparition of her deceased grandfather. I took this snapshot photo here about 4 years earlier from Google Maps. However, if one was to see a photo of this house on Google Maps today, regrettably one will find that the updated image of the house reveals a structure that has been in most part all but overrun and covered over with brush, hedges, and bushes, and so is no longer as visible as it once was. As it has been, and has remained, though still within the family, it has nevertheless all but been abandoned and forgotten about. Alas, also forgotten by the new generation of today, its eerie, mysterious, paranormal, and spectral past unknown. My dear mother always referred to this house as the Spectral Abbot, and for good reason, for reasons I have already mentioned. As one can clearly see, the land on which the house was built is somewhat elevated, and so higher than the rest of the land and property around it. In fact, in that entire area, and indeed that entire neighborhood, and even that part of the town in general, one will find no other property or land with an elevated house or landscape of any kind as this, and for good reason. As I have already pointed out in my initial audiobook and also here in this here production. This here elevated portion of the land, as shown in the photo that the house stands on, is not a natural feature of the landscape, but rather it was once where an ancient either large well or pond was located, and it was my great-grandfather, Charles Henry McKim, who, after filling up the large and deep opening in the ground sometime in the early to mid-20th century with pretty much whatever he could lay his hands on, then covering back over it with dirt that ultimately created this elevated and hill-like landscape we see today. And as I have also already pointed out, the ancient well or pond that once was on the property was the only source of drinking water in that area way back when the native inhabitants of these lands. Meaning the property the house stands on, and also where the PC Mills Park is located just across the road from the house, where my mother used to play at as a young girl, is shown in this here photo as well, where the Sauk, Fox, and Iowa American Indians before the settlers came in and drove them out. Also, apparently there were once many Indian sacred burial grounds on these lands as well, that the settlers had them removed. Of the mentioned Indian tribes, the one that is particularly of interest are the Fox Indians, or the Wakahogi or Wakakagi, and in English the Meskwaki Indians. For it is this group or tribe of American Indians who were historically and are still today notoriously and infamously renowned as master practitioners of witchcraft. As an added note, I would like to take this opportunity and share with the listeners another very interesting story in connection to this property and my mother. In this instance, it also concerns my father as well. A story that I have also shared and mentioned in my published memoirs and factual true life account of myself and my family's experience during the 1979 mullah occupation of my father's country, titled Escape from Iran, 1979 occupation. Cutting to the chase, it was on the front porch of this very house, as seen also in the photo I have provided, that one clear and cool December night, my father, who at the time was an Azeri-Iranian foreign exchange student from Iran, even though he had no intention of marrying my mother, as he had already been betrothed to another young woman back in Iran from the time he was very young, an arrangement that had been made by the family with the woman's relatives once he had graduated from university. Nevertheless, on this particular night, against the wishes of his family, and in direct violation of the tradition and custom he had been raised by, for reasons he has never been able to explain. On this particular night, as he was sitting on the front porch of this house whilst watching my mother, who was sitting on the porch swing, whilst holding me only a few months old at the time in her arms, he decided at that very moment to throw caution to the wind and go against everything he knew, and so to ask my mother to marry him, which of course my mother said yes. Now, I would also like to point to another fact that I have also raised in my mentioned publication. My mother would always say, the moment I saw him, meaning my father, I knew I was going to marry him, and I knew that he would never refuse me and that he would ask me to marry him. Now mind, this was even before my mother had a chance to speak to my father and for my father to become acquainted with her. At that very instant that she first set eyes on my father, she said that she knew. now simply a case of wishful thinking and hoping? Or the precognitive, foresight, and even the powers of a witch influencing events? The Indian burial grounds and witchcraft connection. The entire area, the land at the PC Mills Park, located just across the road from my mother Linda McKim's old childhood home on 1113 West Paterson Street, was where my dear mother would always go and play when she was a little girl, on the land on which the house itself is today standing. This entire area was once inhabited by the Sauk, Fox, and Iowa American Indians before the settlers came in and drove them out. Also, apparently there were once many Indian sacred burial grounds on these lands that the settlers had removed. It's important to mention that the mentioned Indian tribes, and particularly the Fox, are more accurately in their own language, the Wacohagi or Wakakagi, the plural of the word for fox, and in English, the Meskwaki Indians. They were, and are still today, also referred to as the Red Earth people. This group or tribe of American Indians especially were historically, and are still today, notoriously and infamously renowned and known as master practitioners of witchcraft, points in fact referred to in a journal article by the late renowned and highly acclaimed author and expert on archaeological and ethnological study, history, and research, titled Meskwaki Witchcraft Lore, Eugene Fugel. In an abstract on the article, it reads as follows: the culture of the Meskwaki, or Red Earth people, a Central Algonquian Indian tribe better known as the Fox, who resides near Tama, Iowa, contains a number of patterns that may be spoken of as non-aggressive in character, but which are covertly aggressive. Witchcraft lore is stated as being one of these forms, while this theory has been previously developed by others. The author presents additional data to support this thesis from the field of witchcraft lore. Covert aggressiveness is exemplified in the training of the shaman, who is credited with knowledge of all medicine, both good and evil. Since the shaman may choose to perform evil medicine, he is never fully trusted. Disease as well as disaster are attributed to these sorcerers. Witchery feuds between families and secret societies, and distrust between individuals results. Operations and procedures of witches, as well as means of protection against them, are discussed. The lack of aggressiveness and face-to-face social intercourse among the Meskwaki is attributed to fear of inciting witchery. The social effects of this covert aggressiveness is lack of individual cooperation and a backlog of unresolved grievances. The author agrees with others that this is an adjusted way of releasing the tension specific to the Meskwaki social structure. And so one must ask, be it plausible, that the sounds and noises my mother had heard coming from under the bathroom's floor were sounds being made by the paranormal? Apparitions. If so, could these sounds then have been made by the spirits and ghosts of the ancient Indians dead who had been buried in the pond and the surrounding area around the house from bygone years? And so my mother's being a direct descendant of witches, etc., that these spirits haunting the area were maybe trying to establish contact with my mother. And so, was this mysterious and dried up what once may have been a water well or pond that my great-grandfather had built the house on in ancient times, used as a source of drinking water for the area's native Fox Indians? Or perhaps was it used for more darker means as burial ground? Or maybe even a place in which they would practice their witchcraft and make ritualistic sacrifices? One cannot say. Nevertheless, when one takes into account the ancient history of this area and the land my mother's childhood home was built on by my great-grandfather in the early 20th century, and the land's direct link and connection with the Fox Indians practitioners of the art of witchery, etc., I think it's safe to assert with almost unequivocal certainty that there was indeed a link of some sort or connection between my mother's experiencing and witnessing paranormal and spectral encounters and activity during her childhood years while growing up and living in this house, with the dark and mysterious Indian and witchcraft past and history of the land on which the house was built and on which it stands still to this very day. On this point, an issue, I think, as I have said, it is safe to say with absolute certainty that there is, in fact, a very strong connection indeed. The end. So mote it be.